have a question, if you could just raise your hand, and then one of the team members from CEDA will make their way to the table. And maybe if you could just say your name and where you're from, and possibly who your question's to, or if it's just a general question, we'll sort of cover that across the panel today. We've got a question here at the front.
I'm a consular counsellor for the French expatriates in Australia, so I do encounter a number of problems, not only what has to be done with the French community here, but also the way it relates to a different government with a different governance. But my question was, just listening to you and coming back to what we want to achieve, we've learned about numbers and the importance of numbers, the training in mathematics, overcoming usually the discomfort that a lot of people feel about mathematics and science. But I'm saying we need also a culture of how we take risks. And that applies to both men and women. And I think taking risk is something which requires confidence, requires a certain amount of knowledge, a jump into the unknown, all kinds of things. How do we teach that? How do we train people to be able to think outside the square, to be able to access information and then find a use for it, the flexibility that you need, and also the hope that you can actually achieve?
I mean, we can ask, maybe Jane might want to answer that, or indeed Alan. You know, my thoughts around your question around taking risk. You know, there's 350 people in this room. I think about the shadow we cast on others that we work with, and about allowing ourselves the permission to take risks, and also those that we touch and interact with daily. And if I think about my own career, I've had a lot of people that have taken a risk on me in terms of roles and opportunities. And if we can all do something similar in our day-to-day actions, we can actually create that change that we're wanting to see. That would be my thoughts. Jane or Alan, Larry, Cyan.
Well, let me add something in there. So risk is a cultural thing, and young people in particular need to learn that it's acceptable to take a risk, and failure, you get better at failure if you do it a few times. You know, practice makes it easier. And universities historically have been and continue to be the social engines of change in our society. And the universities are beginning to step up. It's been slow. Some have been ahead of the pack. Some are still laggards. But across Australia now, you're seeing more and more universities start to teach entrepreneurialism and to set up hubs within the universities. And so these are opportunities for young people to try real projects where they'll get a little bit of seed funding even from the university, and go out there and maybe do something, maybe fail. More often they'll fail than not, but there's no penalty for failure. I was a judge and a presenter at an extraordinary event just a couple of weeks ago where 56 PhD and early career scientists were brought together for a 24-hour business plan activity. So they get an hour to speed date and make teams of 7, and then there were 8 teams, and they had to think of a project, and they had to work for 24 hours. I saw them at hour 30 because I came in late after they'd been through the initial judging and things like that, and they were still standing and still working. There was only 1 winner, 7 failures, in a sense. But they've been through the excitement, the experience, and they'll take that knowledge and apply it to other things. I think universities have a critically important role to play, not only in giving these young people the practice opportunities, but also direct education and the case studies. You know, bring those case studies in front of their students.
I wanted to ask Cyan whether she felt you took a risk when you started, and what your mother thought.
It's funny. we were just chatting down at the table about, you know, we have the really cliched tech story. You know, we started in my parents' garage. We were living in the basement, and there's almost this romanticism about it now that it is successful. At the time, people were saying, "What are you doing with your life?" Like, you know, yeah, my mother, yeah, absolutely. My parents were saying, "All right, listen, you can live here and we'll feed you, but you know, please make good on this," because they knew we were in debt, and they knew that, you know, that. Yeah, basically, pretty much. I think I knew I had a safety net, and that was very helpful. I think also I actually came from an entrepreneurial family. They weren't entrepreneurs in the traditional sense. My father is a freelance photographer. My mother was a freelance fashion designer. They were by their nature entrepreneurial in their thinking, and my two co-founders both had, you know, very different sort of families. You know, one sort of set up a corner store in PNG, Chinese family, and he learnt entrepreneurialism from that experience, from working in the store, from figuring out how they were making it work under very challenging circumstances. And my other co-founder, my husband, he grew up under a father who, you know, worked in a tech company and was, you know, innovative and entrepreneurial. And we all, you know, I look back now and I think we all had that education from our parents. We all came from a certain echelon of society. We all came from a particular demographic. We all went to private schools. There are a lot of people who don't have that education. And I think, you know, it's important to teach that however we can. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. We'll keep moving because we've got a few questions. We've got a question up the back here. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Fiona Vines from ANZ. My question is for Larry Marshall. A few of you have spoken about the importance of hiring for diversity, but most organisations are set up to reject diversity or to reject people who are different. How do you go about creating that inclusive climate so that you can actually unlock the value of that? And what's it like if you are a bit different and you're trying to sort of fit in?
That's a great question. And as you may know, before running CSIRO, which has well over 5,000 team members, the largest company I ran had 300. In those companies that I founded, it was really easy to have diversity. There was no plan. You just hired great people, and we had every dimension of diversity you can imagine, from gender to age to culture. But it's very natural. And you know, I think nature has done a great job of defining a target. So for gender, it's 50-50 or thereabouts. So that's what we should aspire to. In CSIRO, it is a challenge. So at the entry level, where in terms of gender dimension, we're slightly higher than the output of the university system. So a little bit better than 40% women in that sense. But it falls off a cliff as you work your way up through the layers of management, and then it comes up again. So since I started, I was able to increase the diversity of my executive team to 40%. Been able to increase the diversity of the next layer below that, because there's a lot of layers of management in CSIRO, to also about a bit more than 40%, but there's still a big gap in the middle. And you know, we did a number of things, like being the inaugural member of SAGE, which is the Australian version of the Athena Swan Initiative. I'm a male champion for change, as is my new chairman, David. But in an organisation of scientists, one of the sort of secrets I discovered is there's an absolute resistance to any form of quota or number or target. Everything has to be based on absolute excellence. And so the experiment we tried was this. If you look at how we promote, we look at track record. And in our case, like universities, it's publications, research, etc. And it's really concentrated on, say, the last 3 years of performance. Now, if someone has a life-changing event and they have to leave work for a couple of years, they're automatically not going to perform well. So we put the problem to the scientists. Based on someone's early career work, can you model what they would have done if they hadn't had this life-changing event? And that's what will be submitted for evaluation. And as soon as we framed it as a science problem, nobody had a problem with it. Suddenly it was, yeah, we could do that, we're smart. And that is, I believe, one of the best things we've done in terms of, you know, shifting the settings in a very rational, scientific way to take unnecessary biases out of that system.
Thank you. I think have we got a question up there or down here? Yep. Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Sweeney. I run a business, global business networking organisation with my partner Joe. And I have a question for you about globalisation. So in the lead to getting people being more entrepreneurial, how do we set our future kids up to actually consider global jobs and getting outside of Australia, as you were talking about, you know, maybe a global living wage and thinking bigger, that it may not be their future workforce. They might be living here, but they may not be working necessarily here or for companies here.
Well, I'll have a go. If you look at the graduate destination data for Australia, we're actually not bad at doing that, of going away. How do we educate them, I think, is one of the issues, to be definitely looking at resilience and capacity to think beyond the traditional jobs we have. How do we get them to be entrepreneurial, and the kind of things that we do, I think, but in primary school, secondary school, and then in university is what matter. What matters, making sure that we do understand that difference is not threatening, that difference can be interesting and entertaining and curiosity-driven and very empowering if you get there. I see that as one of the bigger challenges. Often students don't want to go away during their degree because they don't want to get behind their cohort, they'd like to stay with it. And so getting over some of those barriers to make sure they do go to somewhere that's not like here and get some experience, probably one of the challenges, particularly for Australians, because we live where we live. You know, we live on the edge of the empire rather than in the middle of the empire.
Just a quick comment on that. I don't think we've got a problem. I think we're doing a good job training global workers for the future. We've been doing it for a long time. I've hired engineers and scientists in America and had them working for me directly, and I've hired lots of engineers, fewer scientists, but lots of engineers and some scientists in Australia. And the Australians are every bit as good as the American engineers and scientists who I hired in the best place, which was Silicon Valley. Our education is world class. What we're teaching are globally relevant skills. The problem is that we tend to not see it in front of our eyes. We don't value it. We say, oh, woe is me, all these students are going overseas. But you know what? A lot of them come back. A lot of non-Australians come to work here. There's an ebb and flow. We tend to see the ebb, but not the flow. Let's just be happy, embrace what we've got, and if we do it more positively, we'll find that more people will come back, because what draws people to Australia are the job opportunities, the education, and the lifestyle. And our lifestyle is fantastic. There's only one thing about living in Australia that stresses me, and that's the constant negativism in the newspapers and in our political class, or in our political circles, about what's going on. It's a good place to be.
Amen.
Stop this hassle about HECS debt. You know, if you go overseas straight after you graduate, the Australian Tax Office doesn't have a mechanism to get you to pay your HECS debt. And as we all know, it is un-Australian to write, "Dear Tax Office, I'm in New York, and can I please give you some money to pay my tax?" We don't work like that as a nation. And I think we have to get over this paranoia that our people will go away, they will stay away and do the most astonishing things. And I agree with you, Alan, mostly they come home because this is not a bad place to be and interesting. And then we shouldn't just trap them at the airport and grab their HECS, if I could just make a plea. Think wisely while you vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Well, I think we could have gone on with more questions, but I know that we're needing to wrap up now. We've got a few closing remarks, but I just want to really say a big thank you to Larry, Jane, Cyan and Alan here for a fantastic panel. Lots of good dialogue and discussion, and thanks for being such a great audience for us today as well. Thank you.